I recently saw a video posted by Critical Nobody called I Really Miss Burnout. In this video, he explains his adoration for the Burnout series in great detail, even though he didn't play all of them. Now, I think it's an excellent video, and you should go check it out. I'll link it in the description, but my point here is that it inspired me to make this video about a long-dead franchise that I love that I haven't played every entry in. So, if you've read the title of this video, you already know.
Oh, me? Viewtiful Joe.
Viewtiful Joe is just one of those games that goes under the radar nowadays. It was poised to become this massive franchise for Capcom. I mean, they did release 4 games in a 2-year span. It had an anime that aired over here in the States for a bit, and a manga. It just sort of never really gained any traction over here, but the fan base that exists, like myself, are obsessed. We love this game. Viewtiful Joe is tight, responsive, funny, visually impressive, and a blast to get through. But before I get into the game itself, I want to lay down some rules for myself since this is different from my usual format of videos. First off, I'll be playing all 4 Viewtiful Joe games. Now, that doesn't mean I'll finish them, but I will try my best to complete the ones I have not played before. Secondly, I will attempt to play the games in their original form with original controllers, if possible. Thirdly, I won't go for 100% completion, but I will try my best to play the game until I reach the credits screen. Next, I'll be playing the games on the kids difficulty. I know, I should play on adults, and I really tried to, but I hurt my hand on the first game repeating a boss over and over, and it sort of forced my hand, no pun intended. So, trust me, the kids difficulty is not easy either. Lastly, I won't use cheats or any sort of exploits to get through the game. So with that out of the way, let's start with Viewtiful Joe and see how I did. Viewtiful Joe released in North America on October 7th, 2003 for the Gamecube and August 24th, 2004 for the PlayStation 2. Growing up as a kid, I had the PlayStation 2 version, which featured Dante from the Devil May Cry series. I decided to go with the Gamecube version for this video. Sorry, Dante fans, I did play the game on a modded Wii U with a Gamecube controller. I absolutely loved going through this game again as an adult. I hadn't played it to completion in probably 15 years or so. The gist of Viewtiful Joe is that you're at the theater with your girlfriend, Sylvia, on a date. When the movie comes to life and this towering creature kidnaps Sylvia, you get captured as well, and it becomes your mission to save her while the star of the movie, Captain Blue, mentors you throughout. With the V-Watch, you're able to transform from regular Joe to Viewtiful Joe. Throughout the game, you earn different combos, power-ups, etc. The main focus for all of the games are the VFX powers. These allow you to manipulate the film itself. Remember, you are in a movie. So speaking of that quickly, I love how you can see the film strip on the top and bottom of the screen, and I love that when you're transformed back to regular Joe, a film grain is applied to the image. It implies that you're watching a movie again as opposed to being inside of it. I thought that was pretty neat. Anyways, slow allows you to slow down time naturally, Mach speed allows you to speed up time, zoom allows you to focus on Joe and pull off some crazy powerful attacks. And you're also able to combine these VFX powers together. For example, you can combine slow and Mach speed together to get Joe around the map quicker while enemies remain in that slowed state. Viewtiful Joe is such a flashy, exciting game with its fluid animations, striking cel-shaded graphics, and excellent combat loop. I love how when you punch one of these generic enemies in slow-mo, you can see their parts fly off and witness the carnage you've caused. Slow and eventually zoom were the 2 VFX powers I used the most. Mach speed wasn't as useful for as many of the combat scenarios. There were a few bosses and plenty of puzzles that required its use, but for the most part it went unused. With Mach speed, your timing regarding dodges becomes basically impossible, whereas with slow, they become much easier and manageable. It's flashy as hell when you successfully pull off a dodge or a series of dodges, and it's extremely intuitive to control. These red skull icons here show up where the enemy is going to strike, and all you have to do is push the analog stick up or down depending on where you want to put Joe. On lower tier enemies, one dodge stuns them and opens them up for massive damage. Once you stun one enemy, as long as you stay in slow, all of the other enemies are stunnable from any attack you throw at them. You can even kick or punch an enemy into a crowd and cause crazy amounts of carnage. Some of the larger enemies, mini-bosses, bosses, and even some puzzles require you to stun a low-level enemy and then knock them back into your opponent or a switch, for example. You're also able to get a better score by taking enemies down more efficiently, quicker, or by not taking damage at all, which leads to more points for you to spend on upgrades. You can see how this would be beneficial because there are some excellent upgrades here. More hearts, a faster recharging VFX gauge, throwable weapons, new combos, and more are all here. Something I should have invested in in early was the faster recharging VFX gauge. It becomes crucial later on in the game when the difficulty spikes and you're cornered a bit. So the game is split up into an episodic format. Each episode is broken up by 4 acts. The first 3 are typically enemies, puzzles, mini-bosses, etc. The second half of the final act is where your boss fight is, and let me tell you guys, these are some of the coolest boss fights I have ever fought in a video game. They all require very specific methods to take down and will kill you a lot. Some of my favorites were Grand Bruce, this giant shark man that chomps his way around the map until he grabs onto something. Better hope it's not you, because he does an insane amount of damage and he doesn't always let go. He sends out these mines that you sort of have to position between yourself and him, so he'll chomp down on it and you have to use VFX slow while punching him. This does an insane amount of damage on its own, where after he's stunned, he'll typically run away and try to heal up, so now you're the one on the offensive, chasing him down and canceling his heal while getting in more damage. This is all while Grand Bruce changes the water level in the stage, which allows him to send out piranhas and other projectiles to ruin your day. This boss fight highlights one of my favorite things about Viewtiful Joe. It's a beat 'em up, sure, but it requires your attention and patience. Sure, you can try to attack Grand Bruce outside of this window, but it's going to cost you dearly if you mess up, and the risk to reward just isn't worth it. The tide of the battle changes when you've learned his methods, and just when you think it's almost over, he changes it up a bit. His timings change, he chomps around the map even faster, requiring you to adjust as well. It's such a fun boss fight, and it killed me many times until I really got it down packed. Now, I'm not saying that I didn't take a ton of damage in this fight, but I did what I had to do to defeat him. The other boss in Viewtiful Joe that demands your full attention was Fire Leo, and before I talk about him, I want to give you an idea of just how insane episode 6 of Viewtiful Joe is. Titled the Magnificent 5, this level is a pure boss rush of every previous boss up until this point. And oh yeah, every single one, no exceptions. And I hope you remember how to defeat Charles the Third from episode 1, because he's your first opponent. Oh yeah, and there's no checkpoints at all between these bosses. This is insanity, and let me tell you guys, this pushed me to my absolute limit trying to defeat these guys in one go. Now the thing is, in between each episode, your VFX gauge resets to its lowest level, and so you have to grab V-film littered around the levels to expand your gauge's capabilities. Now with the Magnificent 5 starting off with a boss fight, you can kinda see how this might be an issue. This is one of the most punishing levels I have ever played in a video game. Essentially, my strategy was to get as many of these V-films as possible while dodging enemy attacks. Some were easier than others. For example, Charles doesn't really attack you in the air all that much, so I found avoiding him simple. But for someone like Grand Bruce, who flies around the map and attacks you, I died so many times even though I knew how to defeat him. The bosses here are typically the same to their earlier counterparts, just that they have more health and require more of your attention as a result. It's insanity to me that Viewtiful Joe doesn't have a checkpoint anywhere between these bosses, but playing through it I got better and better, further and further, with less and less damage taken. I felt like such a badass in these moments. It reminded me of when I was really little and had no care in the world other than defeating the game my mom had bought for me that month. I'm almost 30 and this game gave me a rush of adrenaline I haven't felt from a video game in a long time. So eventually, after struggling for a while, I finally defeated the Magnificent 5. I thought to myself, whew, man, that was hard, but I'm so glad it's over. Well, enter Fire Leo. This guy is by far the most difficult in the entire Viewtiful Joe franchise, and that is not an exaggeration. This guy will punish you repeatedly, and in my case, injure you physically. So the story is that I replayed this boss so many times, I messed my left thumb up, and I couldn't play the sequels for a few days. Yeah, I had to rest for a video game. That's just how intense this fight is. I've been gaming since the late 90s, and I have never had a video game related injury before. Ever. Never ever. Anyways, Leo's fight requires your mastery of the game's core mechanics. To start, he'll run around the map and throw these boulders up in the air. You have to dodge them initially, but once they're on the ground, you can use Mach speed to punch the boulders, and after a while, it'll set Joe on fire. So now that Joe is on fire temporarily, Leo's fire-based attacks won't hurt Joe, and you can break Fire Leo's fire barrier. Once you break this barrier, however, he'll start to swipe at you and then spin really fast like a tornado. Now this is where this fight gets really intense, because he'll throw 5 consecutive attacks out at you, and you have to dodge every single one of them. No VFX dodge, you just press up or down on the analog stick. At first I thought I had to do this at speed, but I found that you can use VFX slow to make it a bit easier. Now, you can't hold the button down or else your gauge will run out, so I found that I had to use VFX slow at just the right time to give myself a bit more reaction time to his attacks. After you've dodged 5 times, he's stunned, and that allows you to inflict massive damage against him. As the fight rages on, he picks up speed, sends up more boulders, and generally just becomes more unpredictable with his movements. God, I love this game. Just reading Reading this out loud for this video makes me want to play it again. This boss fight was the point where I really thought I was going to abandon this video and move on to something else, but I just kept with it and got better and better and better. After raging and punching my couch, Leo finally fell. It was such a relief for me mentally and physically. My thumb was practically numb by this point, but I charged forward onto the final level. The final level features some of the most difficult puzzles in the game, but I didn't find them too difficult. If you can defeat Fire Leo, you can defeat these puzzles. It's a lot of tight quarters littered with tougher enemies, traps galore with spikes and lasers. There was a point where I took a break from fighting the final boss, and so it didn't save my progress for the level, and I had to do this puzzle section again. And on that attempt, I didn't even take a single hit. It was crazy. Moving along, your mentor for this entire game, Captain Blue, is now your final adversary. You transform into this goofy-looking Megazord suit. I mean, really, this looks like something out of Power Rangers. Anyways, the final boss really was nothing compared to Fire Leo, and after about half an hour of reattempts, he fell. Now, his second form is basically the Captain Blue we know from the tutorials. He was a total cakewalk, but he can still take you out, and there are no checkpoints between his first and second form. And now, with Captain Blue defeated and Sylvia rescued, the credits roll. The game was such a blast to play. It was a sight to see. It made me laugh. It made me angry. It made me feel like a badass. So many emotions. So I've only really gushed over the game, so it had to have some problems, right? What were they? Well, I did briefly mention how the game does not have mid-act saves. So you'll get to a point about halfway through the act where you can power up and all that good stuff, but you can't save. That's a bit of a pain in the ass, and I would have liked to see that change. I would have also liked to see an even easier difficulty offered. I know it's heresy to admit this publicly, but this game has so much more to offer than just its difficulty that I'd like to see more people enjoy it. Maybe they could just give the bosses less health or make upgrades cheaper. I'm not sure what the solution is. Either way, Viewtiful Joe is an incredible game that requires your complete attention, and beating it feels like a major milestone. Just 13 months after its initial North American release, we saw the sequel, Viewtiful Joe 2, drop. I played the game on a modded Wii U with a Gamecube controller. Viewtiful Joe 2 is another great game, but for slightly different reasons. The core gameplay from the first is here. All of the VFX powers, all of your moves, upgrades, etc. are here. However, Sylvia is now a playable character from the get-go, and she has her own moveset and VFX powers. In the first game, you had to unlock her, and she didn't really play a major role in that story beyond the damsel in distress, so it was a bit of a novelty. In the second game, however, she has plenty of speaking lines, and certain puzzles even require her moveset, even if she isn't all that great in combat. After saving her in the first game, she asks Captain Blue for her own V-Watch. She wants to fight too, so after a bit, Captain Blue eventually gives in, and so now in the second game, we can switch between Joe and Sylvia anytime we want. Now, this is good in theory, but in practice, it's not great. I love the game, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that they implemented Sylvia's character enough in the core gameplay loop. For almost every combat encounter, Joe is going to be your go-to. He's stronger, has better VFX powers for combat, and has a wider moveset, whereas Sylvia has a ranged attack and the replay VFX power. Replay is pretty neat actually, so when you hold down the R button, you go into a record mode. Now if you were to kick something, for example, it would replay that kick 2 more times and cause triple the amount of damage it normally would have. This VFX power is required for certain puzzles in the game, as well as the final boss fight that I'll get into later. In addition to Sylvia, Viewtiful Joe 2 features many quality of life improvements that I kept saying to myself that the first game needed during my playthrough. The ability to save after any act is the big one for me. That was something that kept grinding my gears about the first. Another improvement is just a sheer amount of health pickups scattered around the level. Now for many of these, they're not in the foreground, and so you need an upgrade to Mach speed to get them, but the fact that they're there to begin with says a lot about the design. I found Viewtiful Joe 2 to be a bit easier than the first game, which I and my thumb appreciated big time. Now it remains to be seen if this was because of my prior knowledge of Viewtiful Joe's mechanics, or if 2 really is that much easier. Moving along, the game is structured in the same episodic manner as the first game, with 4 acts breaking up the reels. The first 3 acts primarily being a mix of puzzles and combat, with Act 4 being a boss fight. Some reels don't follow this structure, however, some have 3 acts, some have 5, but nothing changes beyond this. Your gameplay is still judged at the end of each act with a score, and that score goes towards upgrades for both Joe and Sylvia. I found that the boss fights in Viewtiful Joe 2 were the biggest disappointments for me, and I'll explain that more in detail. So, the original bosses didn't grab me like the first game either. They weren't as funny or memorable or require as much attention as the first game's bosses. I always felt like I was the badass in this situation. The tide of the fight never really tipped in their favor. Like, yeah, sure, I died a few times on a few of these bosses, but that was just me pushing my luck too far and getting greedy. Now, that's not to say that all of these bosses are bad, because the final one is awesome. The big bad dark hero Jet Black, who pulls you into the real world and takes away your powers. The first phase of the fight, you have to dodge these crescent moon looking things and punch them repeatedly until the cutscene plays. In the cutscene, the power of the audience gives Joe and Sylvia their powers back, and so it plays out like a fight inside a movie would. This guy crushed me multiple times, and that's because you simply can't use the VFX slow to dodge his attacks. You have to remember where they are and react accordingly. Sometimes he'll have a red or blue outline on him, so depending on what it is, you'll have to use the corresponding character. Red for Joe, blue for Sylvia. This is the only time in the game where Sylvia was required in a combat role. Once he starts glowing, you can hit him with a red hot kick or a cool blue kick to take away his shield. Then switch to Joe if you're Sylvia and then punish him. Rinse and repeat and you've beaten Viewtiful Joe 2. He was such a sick boss fight and easily the best of the second game. I enjoyed my time with Viewtiful Joe 2, even if it was less than the first. I believe that if the quality of life improvements of 2 were applied to the first, it'd be a 10 out of 10 game. Now, unfortunately for us, Viewtiful Joe 3 never happened and the story is unresolved. At the end of 2, a dark castle arises in the real world, and I would have assumed that now that Joe and Sylvia have their powers in the real world, the third game would have played out in the real world. I was browsing a guide from 2006 in preparation for this video, and they mentioned how the story will be concluded in Viewtiful Joe 3. That line in general, it just bummed me out big time. We did get 2 more Viewtiful Joe games after this, and so I thought maybe we'd get a glimpse into this ending, but unfortunately not. Both of the games are mobile spin-offs, and both have major problems that I plan to talk about as much as I'm able to. The first spin-off I'll be talking about is Viewtiful Joe Red Hot Rumble, which released on November 5th, 2005 here in North America. I played the Gamecube version on a modded Wii U with a Gamecube controller. Red Hot Rumble is a huge departure for the series, as they decided to make a platform fighter similar to Super Smash Bros, as opposed to a side-scrolling beat-em-up. Well, alright, I don't have an opposition to this, and I thought maybe it could be fun, but after playing the game for about an hour or so, it soured on me. So, the game is structured like any of the other titles. It's episodic and broken up into acts. However, the game's story is told almost entirely through static character portraits and dialogue boxes, as opposed to full-motion video cutscenes. No voice acting or anything outside of the scenes from the anime in between episodes. I haven't seen the anime in probably 15 years, so I didn't really follow the story in this at all, really, and I couldn't finish the game. I hate saying that, because I really wanted to like Red Hot Rumble, but there are so many questionable choices here that I wonder, what were they thinking? So, being a platform fighter, I thought it'd be pretty straightforward. Everyone would have their move list, we'd beat each other up and take down each other's lives until only one remained. No. Red Hot Rumble decides to throw in these weird challenges that pit you against your opponent. These challenges can be collecting more diamonds, doing more damage to a boss, or defeating more enemies than your opponent. After each round, you're scored and bonus points are awarded to the winner. During the fight, minigames will pop up, completely ruining the flow of combat, where you'll have to match your button to the one that displays on the sign, or maybe it's a button mashing contest. Each act has certain requirements to progress through the story, like winning X number of acts or a certain amount of minigames. While you're competing in these challenges, you're able to fight your opponent to slow down their progress. I found while playing this game that I just hated the core gameplay loop. I hated how the fighting aspect took a backseat to running around and collecting diamonds. I hated how the challenges themselves were broken up by these stupid minigames. I hated how they handled VFX powers, where you have to pick them up off the ground first to use any of them. These pickups, like slow, return from the mainline games. There is a new power called sound effects that act as sort of a projectile. You pick this up, hold the button to charge it up, and then it sends out projectiles in whatever direction you're facing. I felt that they took way too long to charge up, and I didn't find a whole lot of use from them. I think the single biggest issue from Viewtiful Joe Red Hot Rumble stems from all the clutter on the screen. Now, the first 2 games had a lot of chaos going on, but you could follow your character. The camera focused on you. You were the main character after all. However, with Red Hot Rumble, you don't get that liberty, seeing as it could be played with up to 4 characters. I mean, just look at this footage right here and tell me what the hell is going on other than me getting my ass whooped. It lacks any of the style, substance, or meta humor that made me fall in love with the first 2 games. Red Hot Rumble just didn't resonate with me at all, and so I was happy to put it down, but sad with how the game turned out. I think a Viewtiful Joe fighting game could work out. There's plenty of characters from the anime and from the games they could use. They could scale some of the bosses down in size and let them be playable, give them their own movesets inspired by their attacks in the games. There's a lot of possibilities there. I'm just spitballing here on this video, but it makes me really question, what were they thinking when they designed this? Maybe they wanted to differentiate themselves from Smash. I don't know, but this mode here, it's not it. It shouldn't be the primary way to play. Released on the same day as Red Hot Rumble in North America, Viewtiful Joe Double Trouble released exclusively for the DS on November 8th, 2005. I captured footage from an emulator, but I played some of the game on a 2DS XL. Just to be clear for my footage, the left screen would be the top on a DS, the right screen being the bottom. I also apologize for my cursor being on the screen in this footage, but the game uses the touchscreen extensively, and this is the only way I know of to use touchscreens on an emulator. After the sour taste that Red Hot Rumble left in my mouth, I was so happy to see Double Trouble return to the traditional beat-em-up style with the first two games. While, yeah, the game isn't as fully featured or fluid as the first two, it's a Viewtiful Joe game in a mobile format, and that's friggin' cool. The game isn't quite structured the same. Instead of 4 longer acts, the reels are split up into much smaller acts that last only a few minutes each max. I imagine this was done due to limitations with the DS, but I'm not 100% sure on that. The core gameplay is brought over from the first two games, with some powers returning and others going away while adding new ones to the fold. Slow returns mostly unchanged, while zoom has morphed into something slightly different. So the top screen is almost always zoomed in, and some abilities will require you to flip the screens around to solve puzzles and give another layer to combat. Split, for example, allows you to swipe the screen and move certain objects into places where they wouldn't normally be. For example, you can move this pipe around and cause it to fill the room with water, which stuns enemies. Slide is another interesting one where you swipe up on the screen and it flips the top and bottom screens around. So that allows you to touch an enemy to stun them, or you can touch certain objects you wouldn't be able to interact with otherwise, like levers and switches. Scratch is another ability, but one I didn't use too much. So with this one, you can use the stylus to scratch an enemy and it'll drop objects on their heads to damage them. I didn't find it all that useful, even if the enemy was stunned. And speaking on that a little bit more, touch controls during combat are just awful. The enemy can still attack you while you only have one hand on the controls, leaving you extremely vulnerable. Every time you're hit, you're taken out of the touch-controlled VFX powers, so you have to initiate them again and try again. So on top of this, it kept occurring multiple times throughout my playthrough. But the game isn't responsive. It would drop my inputs all the time, and I thought maybe it was just some weird emulator problem, so I decided to play the game for a bit on my 2DS XL, and I had the same issue. I used my finger, I used a stylus, it just kept dropping inputs, and that's a buzzkill when you're in the middle of a fight or a timed puzzle. Even outside of combat, your VFX gauge drains when you're using these powers, and so if you drop enough inputs, you're gonna run out. You're gonna have to wait for it to recharge and try again. So it completely killed my excitement for the game, and it ruined the tone. It made the game feel more like a chore than anything else. It was around this time that I noticed other inputs were also dropping. I would frequently try to double kick or lead with a punch into a kick, and it just wouldn't register. Joe would throw a punch and stand there as I'm smashing the button repeatedly to get it to register. It made what should have felt like a great game turn into a mediocre one. And yeah, look, I understand it's a DS game. It's not gonna look graphically amazing. It's not gonna be as fluid as the Gamecube games, but this is unacceptable. I, at the very least, expect controls to work, but they don't. In addition to these issues, the game was just far too easy for when the controls did work. For example, bosses in Double Trouble have a specific way that you need to utilize to defeat them as the developer intended, just like the other games. However, I found that just rushing at the boss and spamming attacks was just as effective, and sometimes even more effective. Sure, I could have gone in and turned the difficulty to adults, but the poor controls, mediocre frame rate, and piss-poor implementation of basic functions turned me off. Double Trouble was a game I couldn't finish, and it devastated me. It really did. I went into this video with these amazing memories of Viewtiful Joe and excitement to play the two games I had never tried before. But after trying them, I'm just left with this sour taste in my mouth. These are the last two games we got in the Viewtiful Joe series, and we haven't heard anything since. I mean, sure, Joe showed up in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which is cool, but I want more than that. I want Viewtiful Joe to be in Smash. I want Viewtiful Joe to be a character that's as beloved as Mario or Sonic. Okay, maybe that's a little too crazy, but I want Viewtiful Joe 3. I want the story to be resolved. I want to fight through the real world. I want to see how this wraps up. Can you imagine the crazy shit they could come up with modern graphics and physics? I know Kamiya doesn't work for Capcom anymore, but I would love to see Capcom team up with Platinum Games and finish this damn story. Maybe they have to gauge interest first. Viewtiful Joe 1+2 HD collection sounds amazing, and I would buy it day one. $60 easy. I'm so bummed out by the last two games in the series, but that doesn't mean that Viewtiful Joe 1 and 2 were any less great than they are. I will always love these games, and after making this video, I have a much deeper appreciation for them. Viewtiful Joe brings me back to a time where nothing else mattered. It was me versus the game, an escape, a true escape from any of my lively duties. Sure, I might be nostalgic for Viewtiful Joe, but replaying them reminded me why I'm nostalgic. Viewtiful Joe is a masterpiece, and I really miss it. Thank you so much for watching this video. This was my biggest video project up until this point, and it took me weeks to play these games, script, write, edit, all that good stuff. I really hope it showed in the video, and I enjoyed making it for you all. So please subscribe, leave constructive criticism in the comments, like the video if you liked it. Man, I'm out of breath. Until next time, have a good day.